Hello, today is November 6, 2017. Uh, I just received a book from Amazon. It's called Principles by Ray Dalio. Uh, this book is, I just started it. It just was published like a month and a half or 2 months ago. Ray Dalio is one of the largest hedge fund managers. I think he's the largest hedge fund manager in the world. He understands quite a bit about investing. And as I was reading this passage out of the book, it reminded me of some of the reasons why I became interested in Bitcoin. So some of the topics many of you have probably already explored are the history of our Federal Reserve System, how it was created in the early 1900s after various runs on the banks, how fractional reserve banking is set up, some of the flaws with that system, and why the FDIC was created to protect your deposits, because the banks actually don't keep all of your money in the vault. They only keep a very small fraction of that amount of money. Also, if you look at the history of gold in the 30s, the government actually made it illegal to hold gold and pretty much forced everyone to turn in their gold for American dollars, and then changed the price of gold to dollar ratio shortly after they collected a lot of the gold. And then later on in 1971, Nixon took us off the gold standard, which dramatically changed the economy. And so some of those reasons, I think a lot of Bitcoin investors have gotten into Bitcoin for some of those reasons. Some of that history you may or may not know about. I encourage you to look it up. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Ray Dalio's word. And to be completely clear, Dalio is not recommending Bitcoin in this book. But I was just reading this little piece of his book, and it reminded me of some of the history lessons that I've read about, which resulted in me becoming interested in Bitcoin. So I'm just going to go through a couple of these paragraphs, and I'll let you do your own research. And at this point, the book is pretty good. I've just gotten started in it, but I highly recommend it. And I want to just be clear that all credit and copyright credit goes to Ray Dalio and his publisher. So I'll start here. As America's politics and economy deteriorated, the country's mood became depressed. And he is talking about his time in college. He's a college student at this point. He had a medical condition which prevented him from going to Vietnam. So he's in college. The Tet Offensive in January 1968 seemed to convey the U.S. was losing the war. That same year, Lyndon Johnson decided not to run for a second term, and Richard Nixon was elected, beginning an even more difficult era. At the same time, France's president, Charles de Gaulle, was turning in his country's dollars for gold because he was concerned the U.S. was printing money to finance its spending. Watching the news and the market move together, I began to see the whole picture and understand the cause-effect relationship between the two. Around 1970 or 71, I noticed gold was starting to tick up in world markets. Until then, like most people, I hadn't paid much attention to currency rates because the currency system had been stable throughout my lifetime. But as currency events increasingly appeared in the news, they caught my attention. I learned that other currencies were fixed against the dollar, that the dollar was fixed against gold, that Americans weren't allowed to own gold, though I wasn't sure why, and that other central banks could convert their paper dollars into gold, which was how they were assured that they wouldn't be hurt if the U.S. printed too many dollars. I heard our government officials poo-poo the worries about the dollar and the excitement about gold, assuring us that the dollar was sound, and that gold was just an archaic metal. Speculators were behind the rising gold prices, they said, and they would get burned once things settled down. Back then, I still assumed that government officials were honest. In the spring of 1971, I graduated college with a nearly perfect grade point average, which got me into Harvard Business School. The summer before I started Harvard Business School, I got a job as a clerk on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. By midsummer, the dollar problem began to reach a breaking point. There were reports that Europeans wouldn't accept dollars from American tourists. The global monetary system was in the process of breaking down, but that wasn't clear to me quite yet. Then, on Sunday, August 15th, 1971, President Nixon went on television to announce that the U.S. would renege on its promise to allow dollars to be turned in for gold, which led the dollar to plummet. Since government officials had promised not to devalue the dollar, I listened with amazement as he spoke. Instead of addressing the fundamental problems behind the pressure on the dollar, he continued to blame speculators, crafting his words to make it sound like he was moving to support the dollar while his actions were doing just the opposite. Floating it, as Nixon was doing, and then letting it sink like a stone, looked a lot like a lie to me. Over the decades since, I've repeatedly seen policymakers deliver such assurances immediately before currency devaluations. So I learned not to believe government policymakers when they assure you that they won't let a currency devaluation happen. The more strongly they make those assurances, the more desperate the situation probably is. So the more likely it is that a devaluation will take place. As I listened to Nixon speak, I wondered what those developments meant. Money, as we'd known it, a claim check to get gold, no longer existed. That couldn't be good. It seemed clear to me that the air of promise that Kennedy had personified was unraveling. Monday morning I walked onto the floor of the exchange expecting pandemonium. There was pandemonium all right, but not the sort I expected. Instead of falling, the stock market jumped about 4%, a significant gain. To try to understand what was happening, I spent the rest of the summer studying past currency devaluations. I learned that everything that was going on, the currency breaking its link to gold and devaluing, the stock market soaring in response, had happened before, and that logical cause-effect relationships made those developments inevitable. My failure to anticipate this, I realized, was due to my being surprised by something that hadn't happened in my lifetime, though it had happened many times before. The message that reality was conveying to me was, you better make sense of what happened to other people in other times and other places, because if you don't, you won't know these things can happen to you, and if they do, you won't know how to deal with them. So this is very important, understanding how currencies interact with markets. This has happened in the past when inflation happens, when currencies are devalued, the stock market tends to rise, and the reason for that is as inflation happens and as inflation increases, typically the profits of corporations also increase in pure number form, because the value of the dollars are going down. So as the value of the dollars are going down, the products that they're selling, the prices are going up, and that is causing profits to inflate, which is causing earnings to go up, which causes the stock market to go up. You can also think of it like if the value of your dollar is going down and the share price value hasn't changed, then it's going to cost more for those share prices in the future as the value of the dollar goes down. So I'll let you guys do your own research looking into some of these things further, but a few things again to highlight: the Federal Reserve in the early 1900s, how it was created, how gold was taken away from Americans in the 1930s, and then Nixon taking us off the dollar standard in 71. I'm not saying that we should go back on a gold standard, but what I am saying is Bitcoin does offer some unique opportunities as a parallel monetary system. I don't think we'll ever get away from the dollar system or fiat currency system, or at least not in the near future, definitely not within the next decade. But I do see opportunities in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please leave them in the comment section below. Thank you.